Hey guys, how's it going? This is Mike with another MLS updater. And the season's come to an end. MLS Cup was exhilarating, and congratulations to LAFC on their first MLS Cup since joining the league. An incredible way to win it. It was definitely one to enjoy, wasn't it? But now it's time to sort of look back at the season that's just been and look ahead to 2023. And today I'm going to be doing that with Chad, who covers Sporting Kansas City, and we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into them, the season that they've had, the ups and the downs, and looking ahead to 2023 with them.
Brilliant. Right. Okay. Hi. I am here with Chad. Chad, how are we doing, buddy?
Michael, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Yeah, really appreciate you giving up the time. Obviously, we're here to talk a bit of sport in Kansas City. Can you let everyone know a bit about your experiences following the side?
Yeah, so I'm one of the editors over at thebluetestament.com. It's one of the SB Nation sites dedicated to the MLS teams. And I've been doing that not for them the whole time, but for about 8 years now. I've been writing about the team, and for them, probably about the last 6 or 7 years, give or take.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty deep into the weeds on Sporting Kansas
Yeah.
City and all things Kansas City soccer.
Yeah. So you've almost done as much time as Graham Zusi has with the club.
Oh yeah, not quite a legend over there. I don't want to
Yeah.
begin to compare myself.
But that's fantastic. So plenty of experiences up and down with the club, and this season has been very up and down for SKC. I think starting the year, I think it was 2 wins in the first 12 games, I think, in MLS.
Yeah, I've
Um,
tried to block it out. It was a little
yeah,
brutal.
but the end, fantastic. What one defeat in the last eight, I think it was, to end the season. So it's a tale of 2 seasons in one, wasn't it? Really?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think we've been kind of spoiled with Peter Vermees as the coach, where it's a lot of really good seasons and consistently in the playoffs, and then
Yeah.
these two blips, 2022 and 2019. And let's hope that's all they are, and that they'll keep being, the quality team that they were in all those other seasons, and maybe even go back to that 2013 form where they won that title.
Yeah, it's I mean the way you're playing to come to finish off the year and to have been written off the season for the season as a club, I guess as well. It was a lot of players really, I guess, fighting for roster spots next year. But that end of season form was as good as any, and to only finish 7 points off the playoffs when the games almost didn't matter is just shows how well Vermees must have done with this group of players to get them back on side.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think about because I mean we've all followed teams that look like they just quit and they gave up and they're not
Mm,
putting in an effort out there every day and they seemed when things weren't going right they just seemed so genuinely like they were trying so hard to overcome it
mm,
when you talk to the guys after the game in the locker room and whatnot. And that down the stretch run, I was looking at it, Eric Tommy and Willie Agata, who made such a big difference down the
yeah.
stretch. They had 10 starts, and it's like, gosh, if they just got their visa paperwork in a
Yeah.
few weeks earlier, like who knows how things would do. But I will say at least it's an optimistic way to end the season because think
Yeah.
of all the teams that kind of just floundered at the end and their off season so miserable. I think it's almost optimistic that how can they not be, at least this good, if not better, once we get even some other guys back and make our off season moves.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned that being having that optimistic feeling about the squad, which was missing at the beginning with the injuries to Gadi Kinder and Alan Pulido, which two DPs out for the entire season before the whistle had been blown. Like how was it's incredibly hard for any club to be able to cope with that. But how did you see this happening in the time covering them? How they were trying to deal with this?
Yeah, so it's interesting because when the Polito announcement came out, I was pretty early in the off season, and it was like the first press conference of the off season, and
Yeah,
Vermees leads with that, and you're kind of stunned, but then you go and you look at the data and say, you know what? Polito's missed like half of all of his games he's ever been with
yeah,
the team, and they were still pretty good in those seasons, so maybe they could overcome it. And then I think what turned out to be the case is that maybe Gadi Kinda was a lot more important than his
yeah.
stat sheet is, right? Because maybe he didn't have a ton of assists or a ton of goals, but he's moving the ball through the midfield, advancing it into the attack, and he's hustling pretty hard out there. He picks up a lot of
Yeah.
yellow cards, so he's playing pretty
Yeah.
physical. And they were really missing that. And then until
Yeah.
they got kind of Eric Tommy to fill that same role, you could tell immediately they were right back to
Yeah.
being as good as they had been in prior seasons. So um, I don't think we could have ever thought it was going to be as bad as it was. And I know there was a subset of the fan base that was really tired of hearing about how they're missing two DPs and that's
Yeah,
the general manager's fault. And he should, because Vermees is the coach and the sporting director,
yeah,
he should be able to overcome that. But in a league like MLS, it's just so weird. You can only spend so much, and there's so many roster rules and
yeah.
restrictions. And I they Vermees said, and I haven't been able to corroborate this because it's just hard data to pull up, but that no team has ever missed two designated players for the entire season. So
Mm,
if that's true, then hey, they finished pretty strong, and
yeah.
hopefully they'll some of them will be back next year. Or somebody will
Yeah.
be filling those roles.
Yeah, definitely. I remember watching these games. I remember Johnny Russell coming out after one of them in this poor run of form and just calling out the team, saying, and himself saying, this is one of the most embarrassing performances I've put in, the whole team's put in. And there did seem to be, though, this thought like, we may be missing these DPs, but we're good players. Why are we doing this? And there seemed to be this anger amongst themselves to try and get things working again. And for
Yeah.
me, seems to be a kind of manager who is able to rally players, which I think seems to have shown.
Yeah, I think Sporting Long has been kind of like the team is the star sort of thing, where there's
Yeah,
not always one superstar lifting everybody up, but then as the league has evolved and the way designated players and U22 guys and targeted allocation money and all these made up
yeah,
MLS words, it's starting to matter more. But I think on top of the DPs being missing, there was a lot of guys hurt. Russell's a great example. You could tell he was just dying out there, like
yeah,
playing through these injuries. And he even talked about it to us quite a bit. He's like, I don't want to make excuses. He's like, I'm hurt, but I need to lift the team up. I'm the captain. It's my job. And I think that's probably part of the reason he had a down year too, not just because he didn't was missing these like talented players around him that could help, create space for him. But yeah, that those comments,
yeah,
that's what a captain does, right? You
yeah,
take the blame and you try to motivate people. But I believe it was after that horrendous 7-2 loss to
yeah.
Portland that he was making those comments. That was a low point, and they climbed up a little bit after that.
Yeah, definitely. It's good to see because yeah, you don't want that just continuing and that anger continuing. Gets the right response, then that's what I guess he was hoping for. I don't know if he was. I don't know how planned that rant was in his head after that game, but
Yeah, that's very he's a very transparent person compared to,
yeah,
some of the players are so well trained about what to say and what not to say, and he's definitely gotten better at that when you can tell when he's in the like PR mode where he's
yeah,
saying the things he's supposed to say, but he's such a great guy about being candid and, just speaking his truth versus always saying these platitudes that a lot of these
yeah,
guys have been trained to say where they can talk for several minutes and not actually say anything, which is I guess
exactly.
a
Yeah.
talent.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it makes it sometimes a bit easier for the editor to be able to cut and paste in some of these. Oh, we said this again. It's so yeah, it's nice. It's nice having a play like that. I've seen him from England coming up through and playing at Derby and things like that.
Yeah.
He's a great player, and he seems to be great off the pitch as well. He's a big character amongst the group, which is always important in your captain, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a character. We've heard some stories. He's told some stories about like I think there was one time he like was screwing around in the locker room and like a training staff person got hurt by him and they were like if that was anybody else they'd
Yeah.
probably be gone, but it's because it's Johnny. He gets away with it somehow. So I'm sure he was very remorseful for what he did though.
Yeah.
Side that suits him. Russell it is! It's a beauty! It's a get out of jail card! Played by Johnny Russell!
We just mentioned a little while ago something I found really interesting. Gary Kinder, obviously, he's not a player who you can look at his stat sheet and go, oh, he's so important because of X and X. But the work he does around the pitch was very missing. And Eric Tommy and Willie Agada seemed two of the. I mean, there's some huge signings in the summer window, but it's hard pressed to think of two that were more important to a team to like really give you much more than what players like maybe Kyrie Shelton and players like that were trying to do but couldn't quite manage.
Yeah, one of the guys on our site, Mike, he wrote this piece about Sporting Kansas City's history of their summer signings, and we're just not a team that goes out there and
No.
makes a big splash in the summer. Like Vermees always talks about, I want him to be here for all the preseason and kind of buy into the culture and build that chemistry. And looking back at the history, basically what Mike concluded was that our best signing ever was a guy, Luis Martins, who's now off the team again, and
Yeah.
he's bouncing around up in Vancouver actually,
Yeah.
and just kind of like a mediocre left back, and that was the best signing ever. And then these two guys just completely blow anything they've ever done in the summer
Yeah.
away. So it'll be interesting to see if it's a philosophy shift in the future about leaving some budgetary space to make a move like that, see where you're deficient and be able to fill that hole. And hopefully it's never as deficient as it was this year, losing
Mm.
essentially your attacking midfielder and your striker, which it's like,
Yeah.
how does your offense work if you don't have those players? So
Exactly.
having those guys, they just came in and made such an impact. I think, like you said, it can't really be undersold how important they were, and maybe in the whole league, because I saw a stat running down the stretch, I think from August 1st on, that Sporting was the second best team in the league behind Montreal heading into the
Wow.
playoffs.
Yeah.
And then, obviously Sporting was not heading into the playoffs,
No.
but had they been, man, they might have been kind of scary for some of these teams in a single elimination format.
Area that has been a real strength for William Agata, his hold-up play. And here's Tommy with an unbelievable volley finish. The first touch was sublime. The second touch was in the back of the net. Eric Tommy opens his Sporting Kansas City account in spectacular fashion.
Yeah, exactly. The like you say, obviously for me, then saying, yeah, he likes to have them coming in pre-season and buy into the squad. But I mean, watching William Gardner after he scored, I think he scored his first goal and sprinting over to me for me and grabbing him. They definitely found two players that bought in within seconds of arriving, and it's always interesting to see from someone who's come to MLS, like covering MLS from abroad, where the season ends in the summer. So there's that difference.
Yeah.
So it's a strange way of having to work out when to bring players in. You have these options, but it sounds interesting for Vermees to now, to have given that a go and had a really good experience from it, really.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to see how they handle it going forward because, like you said, a lot of the biggest leagues around the world are off in the summer. So you can probably get guys on free transfers, or teams might be more willing to sell their players because
Yeah,
they're not in, like, in January when we're having what is essentially our primary transfer window.
yeah,
Um, gosh, who wants to let their team go? Everybody thinks they still got a chance, right? I'm
yeah.
pushing for the championship, or to make European competitions, or to avoid relegation. And
Mm,
there's all these things that factor into, well, I probably don't want to let this guy go. Versus in the summer, it's like, okay, well, there's plenty of players available in those other
yeah,
leagues. They can go pick somebody up. So if MLS can find a way to take advantage of the better deals, they have a bunch of billionaires owning all their teams. They have the
yeah,
money to go get
exactly.
the
Yeah.
guys. So
Yeah, it's a new way of doing it. Obviously, with like some of the South American, Central America runs the same way as the US MLS, but Europe's slightly different. So yeah, it adds a little bit extra planning into how to go about these transfer activities.
for sure.
But let's sort of look towards. I want to mention the Open Cup as well. As the season was struggling along, you got this run going forward, and how difficult was it to go out on penalties to Sacramento in that semi-final when it seemed like so much of your season could have been resurrected at that point with a cup final?
Yeah, it was incredibly painful, right? Because
Mm,
it's like you think you should be able to beat a lower division side. I think most, leagues around the world, when you're playing somebody from a division below you, you expect to
yeah,
beat them. And the monetary investment in a league like the USL Championship is just not there on the
no,
same level as MLS. And I think Sporting were better the entire game, but you have to score goals, and
yeah,
the 0-0 is not good enough. And credit to Sacramento for having a good game plan and being in the right spots to stop those attacks. And the crowd was pretty wild. For I think they
mm,
only have maybe 10,000 or so that go there, but it was definitely heartbreaking because you feel
yeah,
like you have a chance. And then had they gone on to play Orlando, that would have had its own special intrigue, because Orlando used to be Sporting's like affiliate in the minor league
yeah,
before they came to Major League Soccer. So they used to loan their
yeah. It
players
would have
down
been,
there to get them
yeah.
minutes and things. So that'd have been a intriguing, with the Dom Dwyer Bowl or something like that. A player that played for both teams.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, that would have been really exciting to see. But Yeah, it was very difficult. I guess at that point it was trying to get back into some form, but they just sometimes the breaks just weren't going for Kansas City. A lot of the time
Yeah,
you
I
could
think
see the
about
work.
too, like Tommy and Agata, we've mentioned them a few times, and I think they're hopefully going to have a big role with the team going forward. And they had
Mm,
just arrived, so they were just working up to fitness. And
yeah,
Vermees talked about how Tommy had a little bit of an advantage because he was still with Stuttgart, like doing preseason with them, so he was still fit.
yeah,
Versus Agata was just like training at his home, like trying to
yeah,
stay ready. And there's just something about practicing with professional players and
yeah,
having the facilities and again, had they arrived a couple weeks earlier, it probably does play out different because they couldn't play the whole game and they had to come out because they were just tired. Their fitness wasn't there yet. So
yeah,
those two, man, I'm excited for the future with them. At least I'm intrigued to see how these position battles play out when the guys that they quote unquote replaced are back and fighting for to be with them on the field or
yeah.
take their minutes from them. I don't know how that's going to play out.
And Sweat on the run. A couple different options. And God is there! It's four!
Yeah, it's I was thinking it's one of those Vermees now has one of those good headaches going forward. In that
Good
side.
problem to have.
Yeah, definitely. Before we sort of go on to the some of these roster moves going and then looking towards next season, with the good run of form towards the end of the year, how did that change your thoughts on the season as a whole, as teams following, as people following the club? Does this seem still a disappointing season, or does it seem one that, okay, it could have been a lot worse, but this is now looking more promising?
Yeah, I think people probably would get on to me for being too optimistic because early in the year when things weren't going well, I was like, I still feel like they're going to turn around. This feels like a good team. Like you just see all these different parts, and I feel like they're going to come together, and it just really didn't happen,
Yeah.
which was tough. And they would just drop points here and there, and they add up over time, and you pick up a few here or there. They're in it at the end, and that game on decision day matters instead of the season having already been over. So. I think there's no way to say it's not disappointing in MLS
Mm,
where they let in almost half the teams or around half the teams into the playoffs. Like you have to make the playoffs. That seems to be the minimum standard if you're a
yeah,
good team. And they didn't. And had they, this might have been the year where usually Sporting is kind of ground into dust by the end of the year, and they're very tired, and it doesn't look
yeah,
like they have anything left when the playoffs come around. It was the reverse. They were building up and picking up steam, and had gosh a few more games if they're in
yeah,
who knows. I'm not saying they beat your LAFCs or Philadelphia Unions of the world, but I think they would have given them a good game. It would have been exciting, it would have been interesting, and at least again it leaves us optimistic for next year because gosh, if it had just been terrible, like how depressing would this
mm.
off season be? Everybody'd be
Oh,
like fire
completely.
everybody, blow the whole thing up, and it's
Yeah,
kind of hard to do in MLS with all the rules and the contracts, and you can't just buy everybody out and move on. You can
no,
buy one guy out, so it's
yeah.
not a lot of options.
Yeah, like you said, well, I guess one part of seeing how that change in sort of attitude happened towards the second half of the season with these new additions, but also I don't know how much it mirrored the new signings doing so well, but Shallowy re-signing and committing his future to the club as well must have been a really big boost to have a player have that commitment still and say, look, I know it's going badly, but I know it's going to go well, so I'm staying.
Yeah, it's intriguing. I'll be interested to see how it all plays out because he's a player that, he had a rough year there in 2019,
Mm,
the two times basically Sporting have missed the playoffs in the last decade. He went all year, didn't score until like the next to last game of the year, and they were
mm.
celebrating like they won the freaking title. The way they were so excited for this guy, which again I think goes back to the culture and them not quitting on each other and whatnot.
Yeah,
But he's had some ups and downs. He was an MVP candidate in 2021, like in the final lists of those
yeah,
voters, and that's kind of wild. And then down a little bit this year, but I think you can look at all these teams around the world and see that when you're missing key players, it
yeah,
can bring down a lot of people. And I think he's the kind of player that he's going to benefit by having Willie Agata or Alan Polito
yeah,
opening up that space for him. And I had resigned myself to the fact that he was definitely leaving because
yeah,
he's right in that age where if he doesn't go to Europe now, will he ever go? And he did spend a little bit of time in Hungary when he was a youth player, and he's from there.
yeah,
But Yeah, I think it's again, it goes back to the culture, right? This commitment to wanting to be here, and I think to the city. Kansas City deserves a lot of credit as a soccer city because I'm not sure if it came across on the broadcast, but the fans were still showing up. They were
Yeah.
still pretty loud and pretty into these games, even when they literally didn't matter. Like it didn't matter what happened, and the joy of eliminating the Sounders from the playoffs on the
Yeah.
next to last game of the year. They'd never missed the playoffs before, so to get
Exactly.
to be the team to do that, I think it says something about the city, and that probably had a play into, why does Daniel want to come back and want to be here
Yeah.
for another 4 seasons? It's quite a commitment.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking there's those comparisons with obviously Albert Rusnak went to Seattle in free agency and gets a decent pay packet and things like that. So it was this curiosities whether Shallowy would wait, whether if it was Europe or if it was to go to another side in free agency. But I guess for Kansas City, it's obviously great to see that he's felt very much at home there and wants to commit.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And I think the news came out from his agent that he has a targeted allocation money deal. So we know he's not on a
Mm,
designated player deal, but would one of these other teams been willing to pay him
yeah,
designated
exactly.
player money to not no transfer fee, right? Because he'd have been
Yeah.
free to acquire, so you could pay him a higher salary. And those teams like your Colorado Rapids, where they don't go spend a bunch of money to get players, but they seem
Mm,
to find the right guys around MLS to be competitive. Well, not this year, they were awful, but they
yeah.
were really good the year before. So
Yeah, it's an interesting way. Obviously, with the players seem to be a little bit more curious to test sort of free agency now. So it's important for the clubs to be able to manage this a bit better now, and for those back office staff to really plan for that. So, but from a Kansas City, it'll be interesting to see. And like you say, now we'll have Agada and Tommy Polito back in the back, so it'll be a lot of exciting players going forward, and players in sort of good ages as well. I mean, obviously Pulido and Johnny Russell a little bit older than the others. But you've got quite a young and sort of prime ages going forward. I was looking at transfer marked just as the amongst the groups, and it's Kansas City according to their sort of rosters of who's in the
yeah,
first team. They're the fifth oldest in the in MLS. So quite. So I was having a little look around, obviously, and I was looking at these big players, and okay, they're in their late 20s, but it's the defense that's really pushes that age
yeah, that number
bracket
goes up
up.
quite a bit.
So thinking about obviously we were discussing before we started they now have till the 14th of November to decide whether to whether a number of these players will be coming back. And as you look across the back line, there's Tim Melia in goal, 36. Whether he will come back, Graham Zusi, 36 as well, and even the two centre backs, Fontas and Isimat Marin, both we're not sure what's happening with them. How is that? Before we go into which ones you're desperate to stay, how is it? How is that thought of not really knowing how and
Yeah,
it's
it's
being dragged along a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of the big question of the off season. I was actually writing a piece that's going to come out pretty soon for the Blue Testament about the MLS expansion draft with St. Louis City, and it's like, who do you choose to protect? And there's some good veteran players that are getting a little more up there in age, but gosh, how bad would it hurt to see them picked by St. Louis and playing
Yeah.
across the state over there and facing them? But yeah, that's kind of the question of the off season, right? Like we're all kind of waiting and seeing what dominoes need to fall, whatever the expression you want to use is.
Yeah.
And those are the big questions because I think the midfield is pretty set, and I think the front line is pretty set, and I think we're
Yeah.
probably going with those guys. There's probably some depth moves here or there, but yeah, who's playing center back, and do you move from 36-year-old Tim Melia to 21-year-old John Poolskamp in net?
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
it's a bit of a shift. So I think there's a lot of questions still to be answered in the coming weeks.
Yeah, you obviously mentioned in the midfield there being comfortable. Radoja, I believe his name is Nemanja
Y-
Radoja, has come in. So
Yeah.
you've added to that central midfield with like Remy Walter, Uri Russell, I believe still there, Cameron Duke. Like so, you've got quite a little bit of depth in the middle now. But it'd be interesting to see. I was reading your article on on him on the Blue Test on the new signing. It's quite hard to really get too much of a footage on the player specifically in the stats, but having that extra holding midfielder is great for great for the depth. But do you see? I think he mentioned, was it Fontas who mentioned who he spoke to about the league to get a bit more of an understanding. So do you think that suggests that he plays a big part in this team still, maybe, or is it just coincidence?
Yeah, it's hard to know, right? Because they gave quotes, the team gave quotes in their release of the player being signed, Redoya, I think, being signed, that Fontes and him played together, and
Mm,
Fontes basically pitched him on it and told him how great it was, and
yeah,
it'd be really weird to be selling him on it, and then Andreu is gone. But
yeah,
it could happen. He's out of contract. I think it'll all come down to how much he's willing to pay, play for rather money
yeah,
wise, like how much pay are they going to give him, because I don't think he's worth over the million that they've been spending on him the last few years, and he missed a great deal of that time due to injury. I always
yeah,
wonder now, if I'm a guy, I want to go get as much money as I can get, but then do you maybe give like a quote unquote hometown discount for you
yeah,
you played all these years with this team, but you missed a lot of time and you were
yeah,
getting $1 million to be injured and miss years, and
yeah,
do you take a little less? And if so, I'd be fine with Andreu coming out. That's kind of where I've landed on the back line if I have to pick between him and Nicolas Issimont-Marine. But then I think what it
mm,
really comes down to is like who's in the pipeline that we don't know about. The hard thing about soccer and football versus like the rest of the sports in America is that there's just so many good players all over the world that I've never even heard of that could
yeah,
pop in, and like Eric Tommy, for example, never heard of this
yeah,
guy, and then all of a sudden I'm in love. He's great. He's so
yeah,
amazing. He's filling the role so well, and who knows who's out there that could come along. So if
mm,
they've got somebody that they're in talks with, because Vermees always talks about how many weeks or months these conversations are going on for trying
yeah,
to make these deals happen. And he gave an interview a few years ago that I thought was really fascinating about having shadow teams at all the different levels, and basically saying like, okay, so we've got our team, but then we have a first team worth of choices out there that we'd like to go get, and an A, B, a C type thing. And
yeah,
then our second team, we have a shadow team worth of guys that play those positions and look for have the traits that we're looking for that would fill in on the second team. And there's like an A, B, C
yeah,
worth of guys. So it's like, do we have our A guy at center back, or a
yeah,
couple A guys at center back out there
yeah,
that we're about to bring in? Because if so, move on from both of them if you have to. But I
yeah.
doubt he does that. I doubt he does
No,
leave them both on the cutting room floor here.
yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see. And Tim Melia, like you mentioned, and John Polskamp has taken over some of this, taken along some of the starting games towards the end of the season. How has it been seeing him, like young goalkeeper, coming in and putting in some decent performances, and working his way into this squad? Do you see him as the starter next year?
That I guess is another really big question, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think he showed for himself really well down the stretch, and the whole team was just better down the stretch. And I don't know if
Mm,
it's just, again, going back to Tommy Nagata, or the team finally coming together and being healthy. Melia did look a little slow and lost a step at the beginning of the year, but then everybody looked kind of bad at the beginning of the year. So
yeah. Yeah.
was it just that situation? I think it's always a risk, going to a 21-year-old keeper. You don't see a lot of teams around
No.
the world making that their number one guy, but they do have a guy in Kendall McIntosh who I
Yeah.
think is a solid third keeper, and he showed really well when it's
Yeah.
kind of wild. He's much older than John, but he got his first start this year in MLS. He's
Yeah.
bounced around a
So
few
yeah.
rosters, and I think they really must like him because they keep bringing him back, versus that third keeper has been kind of a rotating door.
Yeah.
If they move on, then I'm gonna trust in Vermees and his staff that he thinks he's got the right mix. But if Melia came back for one more year as insurance or to compete with Pools Camp, I think that'd be good, because what's the expression? Iron sharpens iron, right? You
Yeah.
make each other better. If one
Yeah.
person's down, then know that you have this other person that's there to come take your job. But it could have been the last time we saw Tim Melia, which would be kind of sad. He did say Vermees did say one thing down the stretch that kind of like rung in my ear, is Melia had hurt his hamstring, and these muscle injuries, you just never know. You don't want to come back too early and aggravate
Yeah.
them. But he told us in a press conference that he goes, we're not going to rush Tim back just to play him in one game and sacrifice what he means to this team going forward. So it seemed like a vote of confidence that he wants
Yeah.
him around, but it's another player that's out of contract. How much money is it going to cost? You're
Yeah.
working within the MLS salary budget. There's a lot of rules and complexities to navigate, and like the average person who's keeping up with the team, like they don't see all this weird minutia that's happening in the
Yeah.
background. And it's a factor. Sadly, it's just part of the game,
Yeah.
right? You can only have so many guys, and your roster can only be so big. So somebody's probably got to go. I can't imagine
Yeah.
them not turning over anybody after missing the playoffs and
Yeah,
kind of having
exactly.
a down year.
I mean, that's what he can do, Ramsey. He's technically a gifted player. He's done it for his country. They don't close him down. Left foot, right foot, it doesn't really matter. And you can't blame the goalkeeper this time. What a strike that is.
Okay, well, I guess then, speaking of Tim Melia, who's, I guess, almost a new signing coming in at 2014 compared with the 2009 arrival of Graham Zusi. Him as well, 36, same age, going in to the off-season without a contract, whether he will be back or not is a question mark, I guess, but not very much written in pencil. I can't imagine we've seen the last of Graham Zusi at Kansas City.
Yeah, he gave a quote to one of the writers at the Kansas City Star, and he basically said that he still wants to play, and in his contract, I believe he has an option for next year. So obviously, the team can choose not to trigger that option. That was kind of controversial last year when they did that to Ilya, and he left and went and had a best 11 season at LAFC, playing for a title.
Yeah.
But I think he'll probably be back. Like, I
Yeah.
just hope that it's kind of a situation where Caden Pierre, who's so young and promising, can
Yeah.
keep taking minutes from him. But I'm sure Graham is not going to give those minutes away. And if
No.
he's the better guy, I think Vermees has made it pretty clear that he'll play whoever's performing the best and
Yeah.
practicing the best. And Graham had, I think, a really good year when he was healthy. He just missed more time this year than I can really ever recall him missing before with these muscle injuries. So, that could be a father time situation, but
Yeah.
I think he gets a one last go around, kind of maybe a farewell tour. Now, I don't know. He might not think this is his last year. He might be
Yeah.
Tom Bradying it up over here, thinking he's got another decade left. But we'll see. I feel like this is a tough game, a lot of running, pretty hard on you compared to
Yeah.
playing quarterback in the NFL. You can hide behind some good
The big
beefy
guys.
linemen,
Yeah.
keep you safe, So, but I think he's probably back, and I just hope that he's getting a nice split of minutes, and Pierre's our future at right back.
Yeah, it seems to be. I mean, Vermees is very much about the squad and the team. So having players like Zusi who can mentor, be a role model, as well as someone that is still putting in those performances that you have to compete with. He's not a player who's just going to be sitting in the locker room giving out wisdom. He's going to be someone who's going to have his boots on and ready to go every day. So I guess that really would help, like you mentioned, getting Pierre, young players developing in a really competitive environment.
For sure. And I actually have a story about Zusi that I think might kind of show how much he still cares and
Okay.
still wants it. On the last game of the season, I'm sorry, the next to last game of the season, they had beaten, was it the Sounders? I can't remember. Anyways, we're in the locker room, and they had won, and they needed results to go a certain way the rest of the night. And at the time, like, Real Salt Lake, I think, was beating the Galaxy, and they needed the Galaxy to lose, and all these things were happening, and like it was going the right way for a little bit, and then it starts to go wrong. And Graham was like over at a TV in this little area where they get like the fruit and things
Yeah.
after the game, and you could see he's just like dejected, like he really wanted it. He was like, "We're gonna make it in. We're gonna somehow find a way with these like
Yeah.
razor thin margins to put this team in the playoffs." And seeing how it like affected him, that it was over that year, I think it just shows that he's not done. He wants
No.
to come back. So I think if Vermees wants him, he's
Yeah.
back on this team.
Yeah, definitely. It'd be good to see. I mean, like you say, he's very committed, and his performances, he may pick up there's a few more injuries than he would have 10, 20 years ago now, really. But he's definitely a huge part of this side. And another one I've just question on is Roger Espinoza. He's mentioned he wants to come back. Another experienced player. He's played less and less minutes this year from season on past. Do you see him as one that's important for the squad, or is he someone who could be a victim of the roster restrictions?
Yeah, so I think going into the offseason, I thought for sure we had probably seen the last of Roger. Like he plays a position, not that fullback isn't demanding because you're moving up and down the field and you're covering a lot of ground, but it's so physical, and Rogers, like, part of his game is just that being able to close down space and work
Yeah.
box to box. And um but the way he talked, I just, like, it doesn't, like, feel like he's done again, of
Mm.
course, right? Like, and sometimes you don't have a say when you're done
Yeah.
though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think if you're willing to play for a low enough salary, like he took a pay cut last year, if he takes another pay cut, like, he's still probably going to make more money being, deep on the bench on Sporting Kansas City than he would, in a professional atmosphere, knowing that,
Yeah.
he spent his entire adult life being a soccer player. You got to go find a new career at this
Yeah.
point. So I think he's such an important glue guy that I would be totally fine with him coming back. He gave a quote to one of the guys that writes for our website, Jimmy, and the quote was something to the effect of, I want those young guys, your Felipe Hernandez, Cam Dukes, Jake Davis, to come take my job from me. And they did a good
Mm.
job of getting more minutes this year and kind of fighting for those. And he said by the end of this next season, maybe they'll be like, Roger, it's time to retire, because they're going to come take his job. So,
Yeah.
but he's when the team signs a new player, especially if they're a Spanish speaking player, he's
Mm.
kind of the liaison between
Yeah.
them and getting them comfortable. They don't go roommate with another new player. They room with Roger, and he
Yeah.
introduces them and builds them into this culture. And I think we mentioned this before, but the culture on this team, it goes pretty deep. In
Yeah.
my day job, I work in a corporation that talks about culture all the time, and I think
Yeah.
it really does matter. Some places just give lip service to it, but
Yeah.
so many teams would have quit this year with how bad it was going, and they were, of course, down and sad, but they were talking about how they would still try to lift each other up. They would still be critical of each other when they needed to, but in a constructive way. And I think Vermees and all his staff deserves a lot of credit for what he's built. And then players like your Roger Espinosas, your Graham Zeus's, your Johnny Russells, they're all leaders in their own way. And if Roger's going to be a glue guy and you just promise not to play him 90 minutes too often,
Yeah.
I'm okay with him being back. And if
Yeah.
if he just doesn't play much down the stretch because the other guys have taken his job, then that's great. That's what we ultimately long term want to happen. He might not feel like that's great, but
No.
I think that would be okay. So
Yeah, no, I like from what you say there, he wants someone to actually physically take his job. He doesn't want to just hand it over and say, there you go, there's the next player to play. Like, they've got to really wrestle this position from me. And I guess that's what helps those young players, like you say, is like that player that helps amongst the squad. If you're forcing these new younger players to actually take your role, it's giving them that hunger and that part of being amongst the group, which is, yeah, really important in
right,
soccer.
right. You don't get to just be like entitled and go, I'm young and I'm talented and it should be mine. It's you got to
Yeah.
go prove it. You got to go take it. And I think there's something to that. It can be frustrating watching an older lineup
Yeah.
roll out there every day, especially when there was periods where, like, this season is over. But Vermees did a good job, I thought. Well, a better job of playing some of the younger guys and getting them some minutes. And but again, he's not going to hand it to you. If you haven't earned it,
No.
you're not going to get on the field. Or if you're making mistakes, poor Cam Duke, I really like the guy, but he had a rough stretch in the middle of the year.
Yeah.
And he's one of those guys that'll be interesting to see what they do on this November 14th roster situation, because he's on an option. They could always just say,
Okay.
you haven't progressed as much as we'd like, and we'd like to bring up another guy from the academy or something like that, which it'd be a real shame, because he seems like he has a lot of promise, but he's not quite fulfilled it quite yet.
No. So looking at that, are there players that you maybe some of these younger players maybe that have come through, or young players who've been brought in this season that have really surprised you, that you think you can see them playing a huge role next year rather than maybe the parts they've played, or
Yeah, there's a lot of talented young guys, it feels like, and Sporting kind of went full bore on this U22 initiative, this Young
yeah.
Money initiative, as some
Yeah.
places call it. And those guys, they made three U22 signings, Janice, Ndembe, and Volader, and then really only Ndembe got significant minutes, right? The other
Yeah.
two didn't play a ton, but I'm very hopeful that, if you pay transfer fees for these guys, they're young, they come from big leagues or talented soccer countries, that they'll hopefully start playing bigger roles and start
Yeah.
stealing those jobs. But then at the same time, most of them are 20, 21, 22 years old. They're
Mm.
really young guys, so it takes time to get acclimated. They'll have had a full preseason this year, so that should help, and
Yeah.
the whole off season, whatnot. But I'm hopeful for those three in particular. I don't know if we can call Felipe Hernandez as young anymore. I think he's like 24, maybe,
Oh,
something like that.
God.
But still obviously a young guy, but hopefully he'll take that next step forward. He's always been pretty good when he gets into games, and if he's like the first midfielder off the bench on a pretty consistent basis, I think that would be a plus. And I hope he keeps taking those progressive steps. He's one of the weird guys around here that I think he's the very first to go from the academy to the second team then get a first team
Yeah.
contract
Okay.
and work your way up versus, a lot of guys get signed to the first team but then spend some time on the second team
Yeah.
or whatever. So to like keep proving yourself, like, oh, you didn't think I was worthy of a first team contract, well, let me go captain the second team and be amazing at that and force you to bring
Yeah.
me up to the next team. So I've always pulled for a guy like Felipe.
Yeah. It's interesting to see. Yeah, like it's going to be for most clubs around around MLS, the off season is always going to be interesting and not knowing who's going to be returning. But I did like one of the articles I was reading was recently about Kinder and his contract situation, whether he may be able to be brought down into a TAM role, giving you a new DP spot, and there's lots of lots of difficulties in navigating the contract situation in MLS. But could this be? We've seen Toronto have some difficulties bringing in a DP centre back, but could you see that being an area that could be used to help in not so much like replacing older players as well? You can bring in a younger, maybe more experienced than the usual 21, 22-year-olds that may come in on lower wages.
Yeah, that is always an interesting piece because I was thinking going into the off season when I was first writing that and kind of getting confirmation that Kenda wasn't going to be a designated player. Because shout out to Paul Tenorio at the Athletic, he kind of helped me a little bit figuring out that hey, he probably can not be a DP the third year based on how low his wage is and how they can kind of move his transfer fee
Yeah.
around on the budget and things. So we kind of knew it way back at the beginning of the year that it was a possibility. Now Vermees confirmed that they're going to have a position open. But typically, you don't see MLS teams
No.
spend that kind of money at a center back position. I thought, hey, if they do it, they'll do it at the defensive midfielder spot. Because if you got a really good defensive midfielder, man, that can make the center backs look better because he's shielding the
Yeah.
back line
You've
and
seen
helping
it,
them out.
yeah. So many teams have like Nwobobo at Cincinnati doing so well, and before they got Matt Miazga in, it really helped that sign. But yeah, the DM is really important this year.
Yeah, and then it doesn't look like that's what Radoya's
No.
situation is from what we got. Like looking at his past salaries, it'd be
Yeah.
weird if he was a designated player on a free transfer. So
Yeah, definitely.
center back is basically the only position left to do it. So it'll be intriguing to see, do they go ahead and make that move? Do they have somebody going back to our shadow
Yeah.
scouting roster thing? Do they have somebody that's worth that and that could really change this team? Because if you get somebody that's incredibly athletic and can play well with their feet, like Sporting want to do, like, oh
Yeah.
man, what an asset that would be to the team. So I don't know if I would. I could maybe see them just not filling that third designated
Yeah,
player
keeping
spot,
it
and
to
then
the summer. And
that's a good point, right? Because
yeah.
maybe they take advantage of their suddenly good summer scouting abilities and bring
Yeah.
somebody in wherever there's a hole, or maybe somebody's more readily available because the other team's seasons are over, like we were talking about. But I could see them waiting because you know how Major League Soccer is very weird. They could still list whoever their third highest paid player is as a designated player. So right now that would be Eric Tommy, and people would be
Yeah.
like, "Oh, okay, Eric Tommy, he has a really good player. That makes sense that he would be our designated player." But then have that flexibility to potentially buy him down and make a move if it's required, if it's necessary. But I could see them going into the season without it, but I have no inside information. It's
No.
entirely possible somebody's going to get announced like on the 15th, right after all these roster moves play
Yeah.
out. So we'll see. Whatever it is, hopefully the scouting department is on top of their game and they find the right player.
Yeah, and I guess the World Cup's going to play a bit of a part in for some possibly some targets they may be looking at who's got other things on their mind until until the end of December.
Yeah,
So yeah,
actually, Vermees gave a really good quote about that, and he said, you're kind of hoping going into the World Cup that people that you've been targeting, because you hopefully have been targeting them for a long
oh
time,
yeah, yeah,
don't play too great in the World Cup, because then their value is going to shoot through the roof, and maybe you can't afford to get them anymore, or a team, they have the overinflated sense of what this player is worth. So
yeah.
there's an element of like, hopefully whoever they're targeting isn't just go out there and like kill it during the World Cup and drive their value through the roof and mess up any well-laid plans.
Yeah, I have to see. I have to see. It'd be interesting. I mean, yeah, it would always be interesting to have eyes on what that sort of recruitment process is going forward. But
Oh,
I
I'd
think,
love to like see the dry erase board in their office or the spreadsheets or whatever they have going on to see what's going on behind the scenes, who's in the pipeline, who was so close but didn't arrive. Vermees will give nuggets like that every once in a while, and he talked about they tried to bring Zlatan Ibrahimovic to Sporting Kansas City at one point, but of course, does he want to come to Kansas in the middle of the country or
yeah,
Missouri in the middle of the country? He doesn't even probably know those states. So
no,
it's interesting to see how those things sometimes are working in the background and they're trying to make things happen that we just never hear about, never come to fruition.
no. And could you see them looking into some of these players going up that could be available as free agents around MLS from sort of rival teams? We're talking about centre back. Obviously, right now there's players like Alex Cayens and Aaron Long up in New York, and other players who could be available, who might be looking for DP contracts. Could you see them looking sort of domestically, or do you think if they were to go for a DP, would they look abroad?
I mean, historically, they pretty much have always gone abroad for
Yeah.
moves like that. But like we talked about before, free agents are becoming better assets, right? Shallowy would have been a free agent this year because the requirements to be a free agent is less years in the league, less. Not as old. You don't have to be as old.
Yeah.
So as they keep bumping it down, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. It's like something like 5 years in MLS and maybe 25 years old or something like
Mm,
that. And that's a much better sounding player than the free agents of the past, where we were getting our Justin Maps and Brad Davises and things that guys that just didn't contribute. They're at the end of their career. They're
yeah.
hurt when they're here. Kynes is one that jumped out at me. I heard Long wants a designated player contract, and I just
Mm,
don't know. He's not as good as like a Walker Zimmerman in my example, who might be like one of the only DP center backs in the league. And if that's the money he wants, I don't know. Somebody might pay him, but I
yeah.
don't think it would be Sporting.
No. So yeah, it'd be quite exciting to see. I guess it'll be looking into sort of January when the little nuggets will be coming out a little bit more. But what are your hopes now? Like after seeing how well the end of the season's gone, looking forward to 2023. What are your hopes for the team going forward? I'm assuming it's playoffs. But where do
Yeah,
you see it?
I feel like playoffs have got to be kind of the minimum, right? Again, especially I don't know if you saw the rumors of them upping the number of playoff teams to, I
Yeah,
think it's 16. So it's then more than half the league getting in. Like if you
exactly.
don't make it, what does that say about your team? And
Yeah.
it's a contract year for Peter Vermees. He has only signed through the end of the year, which is always kind of interesting. He's
Hmm.
by far the longest tenured coach
Yeah.
in the league. So I don't know what his long-term goals are, if he's looking at Berhalter's job at the national team, or what he wants to do, if he has desires to go abroad. He's been in Kansas City for so long.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, it's a bare minimum playoffs, and then like Peter always says, it's if they don't get a trophy, it's not a successful season. So at least there's one more trophy next year in the League's Cup. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out
Yeah,
with the little
exactly.
group stage, playing some Liga MX teams, and um, I'm always way too optimistic. Like I feel like, oh, they could totally win the league,
Yeah.
right? If they were this good down the stretch and they have Polito and Kinda back and whatever other moves that I don't even know that they're about to make that they make, and of course they could win the league. But then realistically, they're probably not going to be the top of the table, but they've done it a couple of times in the last few years, so they could
Yeah.
get there again. And then once it gets to the playoffs, you just never know. With
No.
especially with a single elimination, like if they can figure out whatever it is to make them good down the stretch, like they did again this year, and they can be hot going into the playoffs, that seems to be the teams that do the best, that are in great form. And often we have a weird situation where 1 and 2 are playing each other in the finals,
Yeah.
but then generally speaking, that doesn't happen. I don't know if it's ever happened before, so
No, it's
it's
been a
kind of
long time.
unique.
Yeah, I've been listening. A few other podcasts have been mentioning how long it's been. Like it's well into a couple of decades.
Okay, yeah, so
I
it's
think
so
it's
far
something like
back, I
that.
just don't.
Yeah.
I was a child, I don't remember. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be interested. I guess like I say with Vermees, he's had so much control over this club. It'd be very strange, I guess, if this were to be his last year. I mean, he's such a big part of the club and the direction it's gone, the culture. Well, I mean, can you imagine the club without him as a leader?
it's really hard to picture. There's a good subset of the fans that wants him just to do one thing or the other, to be the
Yeah.
coach or to be the sporting director. And I think there's some logic in that, right? You have too much responsibility and too
Yeah.
much power. So it can, if it goes wrong, go really wrong. And they'll
Yeah.
joke about Coach Peter Vermees isn't talking well with Sporting Director Peter Vermees because they're not
Yeah.
getting the right people to make this stuff work. But you don't. I can't. The team will. I don't think they'll fire him. I think they'll
No.
try to re-sign him. It's just what does he want
What's
to
he
do
want?
now? Then again, if they miss the playoffs again, maybe they do finally decide to move on. But I wouldn't mind seeing some other person coach and him being the sporting director. But I
Mm.
just don't know how realistic it is that he gives up one of those roles. And
Mm.
it could be a long, hard road back if they blow this whole thing up and start over because he does have his his tentacles so deep into the organization, so to
Exactly,
speak,
yeah.
like all the way down to these, the U12 team. He's got an impact on what the kids are
Yeah.
doing. So, and then to the business side of the house too, it's like he's so involved and he's had such a big part of turning this team around from, if you look at when he came to, what the Wizards were and what
Mm.
they are now as Sporting Kansas City. It's wild, the transformation. I think they're a model for these, especially smaller markets in the league, that who wouldn't want to emulate them or have a stadium or a crowd support like them. And I think Peter deserves a lot of credit for that stuff. And I don't think most people wouldn't give him credit,
No,
but
yeah.
at some point they're going to be they're going to be over it and they're going to try something new. But the grass
Yeah.
isn't always greener on that other side. So.
No, exactly. And I guess it's when someone has so much experience, there's a whole new generation of fans coming through that may not be aware of what he's done, and they're more aware of this chopping and changing managers kind of style
Right.
of style of
Of the
club.
rest of the
So,
world, right? Yeah.
exactly. So, but who knows? I mean, like you say, I mean, legends like Graham Zusi, as they come towards the end, maybe they'll start joining back office staff, and maybe with the experiences they've had with Vermees, you could be seeing sort of Tim Melia and Graham Zusi taking a role within the club off
It
of
would be
the
interesting, right?
off of the
There's already a
bench.
little bit of it, right? Benny Feilhaber is the coach of the second team,
Yeah,
and Paulo Nagamura was the second team coach before him. So I think there is again, going culture, right? That
yeah,
maybe they want to be a part of that. And obviously, it'd be very fascinating to see Vermees have a whole coaching tree start to
yeah,
develop around, like the Bill Parcells coaching tree
exactly.
around the NFL, right?
So yeah, that'll be really interesting to see. But thank you so much for joining me today. Like, it's been great to get a little bit more of an idea on Sporting Kansas City as a like specifically, rather than seeing them as a club that I've enjoyed watching around the league. Can you remind people where they can find you on Twitter and where they can find the Blue Testament as well?
Yeah. So it's thebluetestament.com. And then you can find me on Twitter at play490, PLAYFOR 90, the number 90.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's mostly where you're going to get me, Twitter and my website.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. And it's a big. I remember seeing a picture of like some of the most popular soccer teams within states, and so many states it's a European Cup that's the most sort of searched on Twitter and things like that. But around sort of Kansas City, Missouri, it's all Kansas City. It's such a well followed teams.
Yeah, I think I saw that graphic too. It's like
Yeah,
Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Oklahoma. It was like a
yeah.
whole kind of Midwest area there, which is great. Again, great fans, and I love being out there, and I love being a fan as well as getting to report on it.
Yeah, fantastic, brilliant. Thank you so much, Chad. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for the time, Michael.
Well, thanks again, Chad. That was really interesting for me. A great team in MLS with a lot of history here, and it'll be interesting to see how 2023 goes, and hopefully they'll have a few less issues than they did going into 2022. Please follow Chad and the Blue Testament for all your SKC news. It's a great read, really up to date, really informative, and it will be interesting to see how they get on next season. You can follow me, as you know, at Mike Rice 1983 on Twitter. Please like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be back soon with a few more little dives into teams around MLS. Thanks very much, guys. Goodbye.